hope you're doing well. Welcome back to another video. In today's video I'm going to tell you about the 18 books I read in May. I did not realise I was going to read that much, but I did, and I just think it's going to be better in June, hopefully. Even like, I'm happy with it obviously, but June, I'm really envisioning an amazing reader month. I also made my first iced coffee of the month. 100% not going to be the last. Before we get into June, I need to tell you about what I read in May. 16 physical and 2 fully audio. A couple of these I listened to some audibly as well. Came out to 3,658 pages, which is basically February and March's page count combined, and 42.52 hours of audiobook listening. I only had 2 5-stars, a couple within the 4 range, and then some like between 2 and 3. On the whole, I think it was quite a decent reading month. I got through quite a bit of a lot of genres as well, and I'm happy with it. I did do 2 very long reading vlogs in May, and the books that I read in them I'm only gonna talk very quickly about because I spoke a lot about them in those videos, so I'll direct you to them up there if you wish to hear my more in-depth thoughts. These are the first 5 I read. They were inspired from randomly picking Taylor Swift's song. I forgot what the actual song inspirations were, but the first book I read was Idle Burning by Rin Usami, translated by Aiza Yoneda from Japanese. I think I gave this about 3 stars. This I thought was fine. It's about sort of otaku culture, idol culture, following a young girl in Japan and her obsession with her idol. It all consumes her, and the way that she sort of reacts to an allegation made against him. Yeah, I would recommend this. It just didn't really have that much really to say, but I did quite like the writing. It did flow very quickly. Then I read What If It's Us by Becky Albertelli and Adam Silvera. This is a queer YA romance set in New York with these 2 boys. It's dual POV, and they sort of meet by accident, and then they didn't get each other's numbers, and they're sort of thinking did he like me? Did what was actually happening? And they both sort of try and find each other, and then it's sort of them trying to go on first dates and how they don't really work out. But yeah, on the whole, I did really enjoy it. I think it was about a 4-star rating. It's a little bit long, but I do think all the parts of it were, you know, important, and I was still enjoying reading them. I don't know if I'm really going to pick up the second one. I probably will if I find it a charity shop or something, but I'm not actively searching for it. But yeah, I do definitely want to read more by both of these authors, and I would recommend it. Then I came to the best read of the month. This was exquisite. This is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I still need to do my whole book review for this and had quotes and things, because this was just so good. It's a literary memoir, and she tells the story of an abusive relationship with another woman, and it's told throughout these so many different narrative forms, and I just think it was absolutely brilliant. It is so clever and genius, and the way that she sort of tells a story via these different formats is just mind-blowing. I don't know how she did it, and it's just such beautiful writing, and it's a story that needs to be told because there is so little representation of queer female domestic abuse, and I just thought it was so great, and I would billion% recommend giving it a read. Similarly is Inseparables by Simone de Beauvoir. This is translated from French by Lauren Elkin. This is my first work by de Beauvoir, and most certainly not the last. This is French autofiction, which is my favorite niche. This has the story of Sylvie, who is basically Simone. She meets her friend Andre, who is a representation of her childhood friend Zaza, when they're quite young, and she breathes life into this sort of conservative religious school, and they talk about politics and philosophy and ethics and, you know, a lot of different things in their futures. And I just think the way she sort of talks about the place of women in the time it's set, and the expectations put on them, and the way that they sort of move apart, and yeah, I just thought it was just absolutely brilliant, and the writing is beautiful, beautiful French translated fiction. It's just so good. You not always, but a lot of the time. And yeah, I cannot wait to read more by her. Another really high rated book was In Memoriam by Alice Wynne. This was one of my 24 of 2024. I really enjoyed this. I gave it about a 4.5 star rating. It follows two young men, Sydney Elwood and Henry Gaunt, and they're at sort of like a boarding school in sort of like the beginning of World War One, and then Henry's mother forces him away to enlist in the army because she's German, and she doesn't want him sort of like to be viewed as like a traitor. So he does, and then Sydney comes later to the front, and it's just sort of about their like love and their relationship, and how like they both love each other but they don't really want to say it because they don't know if it can be a thing. And also it's like 1914-ish sort of time, like it can't be a thing anyway. And it just talks about like the brutality of the war and how so many young men died because of stupid instructions. And yeah, I thought it was good. Some bits I was like, I don't know if I fully understand, or it doesn't make that much sense, but on the whole I do think it was done very well, and it does tie the line of historical and sort of like a romance very well. And yeah, and I would recommend it. I would love to read more by her. Then I read the worst book of the month, which was The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. The average of each story gave me like a 2.3 or something star rating. Some of them weren't that bad. The Bloody Chamber and The Lady of the House of Love, I think, are my two favourites. But the rest was just a bit meh. And also The Snow Child, which is like 2 pages long, that is probably the worst thing I think I've ever read, ever. It started out good. It's sort of like Snow White-esque, and then it just descends into like what the actual is going on. Like, I'm sorry, like why did her mind come up with that? And yeah, it waffles a lot. Like, you don't fully understand what's like happening. Sometimes it's quite hard to fully grasp. I get that there is probably more allegories and, you know, hidden messages and things in the stories that I'm just not smart enough to get, which maybe that's why I don't like it as much, because I'm like, I maybe it's not for me, I don't know. Also it's sort of held as being quite feminist and stuff, but quite a few times like women are like bringing other women down. It just doesn't really give me that vibe. And yeah, on the whole I didn't really like this. I would not recommend it, and I'm sort of put off by reading anything else by her in the near future anyway. But that was that. I'm sort of glad I read it, but I do wish I DNF'd it, if I'm being completely honest. Then I have 7 books, not including Pity, that I read for my Eurovision inspired reading vlog. So again, I'm not going to go that much detail with them. But for the Australian entry, I read Marlowe by J. Carmichael. This was a story of 2 like gay men in the 1950s Melbourne, and the main character Christopher moves from the small town of Marlowe to the city to sort of like get away from that sort of like small town like pressure. But he finds out that Melbourne is similar in a way, and there's still the same pressures. And yeah, it's very like quite sparse, and like you sort of have to read between the lines in some sense of like what is not being said and what is not happening, because from the historical notes, which really gave a lot more to the book, it talks about how like the pressures were on queer men and queer people in Australia at the time, the police and the media, and sort of like their onslaught against the queer community. So there is so little like coverage and like, you know, sources to know about the lives of people that they've drawn the decade. I just felt like there was like things missing from it, and it was hard to sort of fully engage with the characters and what's happening, because I don't know how to explain it, but I felt it was all like a divide. But yeah, on the whole, I enjoyed it and I would recommend it, but I just wish it was more fleshed out. And I think for star rating, I'm thinking maybe about a 3.75 or a 4. Then I read Definite Penguin by Andrei Kirchhoff. This is translated from Russian by George Bird. I didn't like this. I think I gave it about a 2.25 star rating. It's following the main character Victor, and he has a pet penguin called Misha, which no one questions for some reason in the middle of Kiev, but yeah. And he starts writing obituaries for people that haven't died yet, sort of like VIP people, and then I guess sort of like people are after him, and there's sort of like a like gang sort of like esque thing. It's all quite hard to understand, if I'm being completely honest. I feel like very little happens, and what does, there's low stakes as well, which just doesn't really make that much sense to me. He's also like put in the charge in a way of a young girl called Sonia, who I did really like. There's also sort of like another character called Nina and other characters in here. But yeah, on the whole, I didn't really like this story. It was just quite hard to get through. I didn't like the writing. It was quite like stop start and a little bit hard to, you know, fully grasp. Maybe the translation problem. It's editor Cam. But I also wanted to say with Death in the Penguin, I did quite like the way Kirchhoff sort of like painted the picture of post-Soviet Ukraine, and sort of like the lack of services and support from like the government and things, and sort of like the hardships and deprivation of sort of certain places. And also, I've been having loads of issues like doing recording today, and I missed out the start of the next book. But I believe I was saying how it starts with the main character who is unknown, in like the 20s, and then it goes back and it talks about like her like relationship with this other man who's so unnamed, and then how it moves on. So just take it as you will. I'm so sorry, but yeah, it keeps stopping recording. It's so annoying me. But they have sort of like a toxic relationship, but just sort of like focuses on this, and the main character, and sort of like how she like feels like she's lost her time and her opportunities and sort of like her young adult life in some sense, by focusing so much on the marriage, and he doesn't. I think it was done quite well. It definitely like paints a picture of like 70s Zagreb quite well, and sort of like the place of women in that time frame. It is just quite dense and quite slow, and it sort of like is very slow, and then at the end it picks up quite fast, and I just felt like it could have been a little bit more better paced, and it's just a little bit hard to understand fully what is going on at sometimes because the writing is quite dense and like long passages. But yeah, I would recommend this, and I'm probably interested to read something else by her. I then read a poetry collection for another Ukrainian entry because I didn't want to read the other novel I have from that country, but that was Food for the Dead by Charlotte Shevchenko Knight. She is of British and Ukrainian heritage. It's very slim. I did quite like this poetry collection. I gave it about a 4-star rating. It's split into different sections, and it talks about like the generational trauma of the Holodomor, which is a man-made famine drawn like Stalin era in Ukraine in the 30s, and how that sort of like impacted sort of like her family, like her grandmothers. And it talks about like food a lot, and how food and hunger is weaved in throughout the different poems, drawn like the time frame it's set. And then it also comes more up to date as well with the current conflict in the country. And yeah, I think it was just done well, and I enjoyed the poems despite the harshness of them. I deleted so much stuff, so it's better work now. But the next book I read in that video was Love Me Tender by Constance Debray, translated from French by Holly James. This is a work of autofiction. It follows basically the author, and it's I think about 3 years after her divorce from her husband Lawrence, or ex-husband obviously, and she tells him that she started seeing women, and he goes on this very like vicious custody battle over their son Paul, and that sort of forms the primary plot line of the book, and sort of like the hurdles and things she has to overcome just to get like such a short time with her son. Another part of the book is sort of like her sexual like reawakening, being a lesbian woman. He isn't really like focusing on having a proper relationship with them. Felt like it was fine. This was on my 2024, so I was really excited for it, but I just felt like it was a little bit messy and a little bit just, you know, it could have done with a bit more editing. It's sort of a lot of things, like I said quite a few times, a little bit contradictory at times as well. I guess you sort of have to think that she's in such a horrible place, like with her son being basically taken away from her, but some of the times the way she thinks about like sort of like the newfound freedom of it is a little bit like questionable, and also some other things. And I also didn't really appreciate the fact that as a lesbian woman she uses the F slur a couple times, and there is no gay male characters in this, so it was just a little bit uneasy, I guess. But I am possibly gonna read the book that actually came out before this, but it was translated after for some reason, I don't know why, called Playboy, which is more about her like knowing that she is a lesbian while still in the marriage, I believe. But I don't know, because I didn't really like the writing. It was good, and like it's very French, but it was just a bit nah, I don't know. But that was that, about 3 stars from me. Then I read the third best book of the month, which is Pity by Andrew Macmillan. I want to do like a whole video possibly on this because I have a lot to say, but this was just really, really good. It's set in Barnsley, which is an ex-mining town in South Yorkshire. It follows like 3 generations of the same family. Furthest back is sort of like poetry sections in a way, like going to work in the mines from like one man's perspective, and it leads up to sort of like an incident, and it's very sort of like monotonous, but the subtle changes you can see, and it just reads so like lyrical, and it sort of like shows the brutality of working in the mines, and I think that was just done so well. Also perspectives from brothers Alex and Brian, who were the sons of the man of the man in the mines, and they sort of like how they are now and how they think about like their lives. Alex and Brian talks about sort of like the town and there's sort of like these people that have come to do sort of like interviews with people from there, and how he sort of like talks about how the town is becoming now and like what is its purpose. And then there's also chapters from Simon, who is Alex's son, and sort of like a budding relationship with Ryan, and sort of like their like experiences of like contemporary queer life in the town and like Britain. It sort of like all works together. It's so clever, and there's different sort of like narrative forms in some sense as well, and I just feel like there was so much to unpack. I just feel like it could have definitely benefited from being longer, so you could have had more experience and time with these characters to learn more about them. But at the same time, I feel like the slimness and that sort of like short time you get with them is quite powerful in and of itself. And yeah, I would so recommend this. I really want to read some of Macmillan's poetry, and in the future if he writes any more novels, I would definitely be picking them up. And I would so recommend this. I really want to give this maybe a reread in maybe about a year's time. But yeah, love that. It was Farewell Cowboy by Olga Savicevic. This is translated from Croatian by Celia Hawksworth. This is following a woman, and she goes back to the town of Split from Zagreb. This is about 4 years after her younger brother Daniel died by suicide, and it's sort of like the impact of that on her family. From the description, I thought it was going to be more about her uncovering the root causes of the suicide and why did he do it, and did he properly do it, or was it something else going on, and things like that. But it's not really. I feel like what it does best is the way she talks about the town of Split and the native residents, and how like they live in the old settlement, and how it's quite like different to like the newer parts and the more touristy parts of the town, and how they're sort of like being pushed away in the like lack of services and, you know, what they have available to them. I feel like that is done very well, and it just sort of like puts on show the divide. But otherwise it's very monotonous, and it sort of reads a little bit like a diary of quite a boring person that's quite wordy, and she sort of says a lot but she doesn't really say anything at the same time. And when the narrative changes from when it goes to the eastern section, which is probably about 40ish pages, I just really didn't like that. I didn't really like the way it changed and whose perspective and the perspectives we got. But yeah, on the whole, I thought it was fine, but I didn't really enjoy it. I'm probably giving it about a 2.5 star rating. I would recommend it in some sense, but at the same time, not really. So yeah, finalizing that video was a sort of Swiss entry, and that is Winter in Stocktrade by Elisa Shordusapin. She is French Korean. She lives in Switzerland, and she sort of like identifies with sort of like Swiss lit. So I chose that. But this follows a young woman who works at a guest house in Sokcho. It's sort of like a vacation town in the north of South Korea. This French cartoonist comes to stay, and he wants her to like show him the sort of like touristy parts of the city, but she wants to show more of the real Sokcho, and like being in winter, and how like there is little really going on, and like the fish market her mum works at, and sort of like the possible threat of invasion from the north, and the impacts of the war because it's so close to the border, and sort of like getting her like thoughts immortalized. It's very like sparse, and quite little happens in some sense, but it just flows so well, and I really love like the writing, and it was very a quick short read. I would love to read something else like this in other parts of like the world with other characters. I just felt like it was just done very well, but at the same time there wasn't really that much there to properly grip, so I'm probably giving this about a 4-star rating, but I would so recommend it, and I definitely want to check out more by her. Also, I forgot to say that this is translated from Anissa Abbas-Higgins from French, and she translated one of my favourite books last year, All Men Want to Know by Nina Burari, and I just felt like her translation here again was like very well. I don't know if that's the author or the translator, but it was just very good. Then listens to Anna O by Matthew Blake, I believe. I listened to this through BorrowBox. This was sort of like a thriller-ish mystery book. It's hard to explain the plot. It's quite like dense, but basically this woman called Anna O apparently killed her friends, and that was sort of like 4 years ago than the current time frame, and we sort of like get perspectives from her journal, and then in the current time frame, this sleep psychologist man called Ben, he has been tasked with trying to wake her so she can like stand trial, and him and other perspectives and stuff are trying to work out like, did she actually kill these people, and sort of like if so why, and like how did it all work out. It is quite a complex book and quite a lot happens, but I did feel like it was a bit too long really. I think the audiobook was about 11 hours. I feel like it could have been cut down by about 2, just to make it a bit more succinct. It just dragged on a little bit. I wasn't that keen personally on the ending and sort of like some of the twists and things, but at the same time I do understand why. I think for star rating probably about a 3. I am intrigued maybe to read something else by him, but I don't know. I wasn't like blown away, and I didn't fully like any of the characters as well, so yeah. I read Worst Idea Ever.
I read this because for one of the prompts from different challenges I'm doing throughout the year is called Buzzwordathon, and the May prompt was every. I saw this in my self-destruct list, and I was just like, ever. I was like, that's the prompt, no? And then when I was about 80% through, like about there, looking at the cover and I was like, that says ever, not every. I think I'm probably just going to count it anyway because it's quite a chunker, and I read it specifically for that purpose, and I mean, like, it's my rules, like it doesn't really matter, it's not the end of the world, so yeah, I cheated with that, but it wasn't really my fault. I mean, it was, but at the same time, like, what can I do? But yeah.
This is Worst Idea Ever by Jane Fallon. It is following Georgia, and to help her friend Lydia, who is also an illustrator of like books, they both are, they sort of like best friends, and sort of like sisterly best friends. She creates this account on Twitter, and she sort of like talks with Lydia and sort of like bigs her up, and sort of like be sort of like a friend with her, to promote her like business. And Lydia starts talking with her quite a lot, and then she starts sharing things about her, between her and Georgia's friendship, and something that could end Georgia and her husband Nick's marriage. And it's sort of like how like this news sort of like spirals and spirals, impacts on sort of like Georgia's different relationships with her like friends and family, and especially with her husband Nick. And I felt like it was done quite well. It's very like fast paced. I read it in about 2 days, I think, which I think is quite good for quite a chunky book. And I really felt for Georgia, and sort of like you get into her like mind in a sense, and you're sort of like following her along. I do question some things as well, and you're like, why wouldn't it happen the other way, and things, and like if they're so close, then why would she do that and stuff like that. But on the whole, it was decent. I don't know if I'm going to read anything else by Fallon anytime soon, but possibly. I would recommend this. I think I'm probably going to give this about a 3.5. 5-star rating. It was just very easy to read, I'd say. Penultimate book I read was Bellies by Nicola Dinnan. I started reading this in late March for the Trans Rights Readathon. Got to around 40%, and then like in the past 2 days I finished the rest of it because I was just wanted to. But I enjoyed this quite a lot. I think I'm going to give it about a 4.5-star rating. It's following these two people, Tom and Ming, and they start like as a male gay relationship. I'd say 20 to 30% is this gay relationship, and you're getting sort of like both perspectives in some sense. And then Ming says that she wants to transition, and I felt like it was good because you had enough time to understand her mind and sort of like what was going on inside it, and the reasons for her decisions. And then the rest of it is sort of like, how do they move on from this news and her like need to transition, and their like relationship, and also relationships with other friends, and how sort of like it works out. That's like the trans experience in contemporary society, in like London and also New York and other places as well that they go to. And Ming is sort of like Malaysian and talks about like her mother and her father and stepmom as well, and lots of other characters that come into it. But what I took away most was sort of like the power of friendships, and how they're so special, and how they're things that are unique and you can't really get otherwise, and just sort of like to, you know, love your friends and appreciate them for who they are. And yeah, I did think it was just done very well. It's very like Sally Rooney-esque writing. It's a little bit pretentious at times, and she sort of goes a bit too much into detail, I'd say, with like certain parts of the book that I felt was a little bit unnecessary. To get over that hurdle of knowing it's going to be like that, you sort of just appreciate the like way that she focuses in on the small things. But yeah, I would really recommend this, and I would love to read more by Dinnan. I believe she is working on a new book currently, so yeah, recommend. Finally, I listened to The Twat Files by Dawn French. This is another audiobook, and in it she just like retells times when she was a self-proclaimed twat, and sort of like embarrassing moments and funny moments and petty moments as well, and things like that. And she does do quite a lot. It's quite varied, and I did really enjoy it. I think maybe about a 4-star rating. I do really love Dawn French, everything she's been in. I've got a couple of her books, her fiction books, but I haven't read them yet. But yeah, I enjoyed this. I would recommend it. There's not really that much to it, but it's not really trying to be anything much. It's just short. It's just her telling times when she was in funny predicaments. It sort of like shows the humanness of like celebrities, and she is also a very like naturally funny person. And yeah, I would recommend it if you're interested in her, or like sort of like funny moments in someone's lives. Say these 5 were the best, specifically The Inseparables and In the Dream House were just amazing 5-star reads. And with these 3, I feel like maybe another book by them definitely have the potential to be 5 stars, or possibly on rereads as well. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Have a nice morning, evening, night, wherever you are in the world. Enjoy June. Happy Pride if you celebrate. And I shall be seeing you soon. Bye.